What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Eclectic Beard. So this go around, we got History Summarized, Wales. How the fuck have I been doing this for 2 years and not looked at Wales as far as their history is concerned? How? Same with Scotland. I've got to take a look at Scotland as well. I've looked at Ireland. I've looked at England, but not Wales and Scotland. My apologies if you are a subscriber from either one of those countries. Like, seriously. Bad juju, bad failing on my part. Bad failing on my part. We're going to correct that. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Styles is an uneven affair, to put it mildly. We're familiar with how Scotland and Ireland drew the imperial short stick and enjoyed the pleasure of being sat upon by England, but perhaps the shortest stick of the bunch was drawn by Wales, who was often left out of the discussion entirely. And while I'm shocked that anybody could
Well, according to some Americans, Wales doesn't exist unless it's an animal.
gloss over the country that is a freaking dragon flag, Wales has been tragically sidelined.
And that's the coolest flag of any country, I think. Like, that's badass. That's something that that's Game of Thrones type stuff in modern day, as far as, like, if you see fantasy stuff with all the shields and the crests and stuff like that, just the fact their flag, and I'm not saying that it's, that it's correlation, folks, correlation, so don't get upset. Correlation, modern times, to that's the nearest parallel I can draw. Just hear me out, all right? They got a dragon. Who doesn't like dragons? I mean, maybe if you like unicorns and you're afraid the dragon might eat the unicorn, so you don't like dragons for that reason, that would make sense. But still, I mean, we get tattoos of dragons and things like that. It's badass, dude. It's a badass flag.
Line from the historical narrative of the Isles, and I will not stand for it. Wales has impressively and improbably maintained a distinct Celtic culture since the very start, and it is far too cool for historians to be doing them dirty like that. So, to see how Wales did the hard carry for Great Britain's culture for 2,000 straight years, let's do some history. A proper understanding of this whole Wales business requires us to go way back in British history. No, too far. Yeah, there we go. See, Celtic culture in Britain is the foundation of what will eventually become Wales, but these guys aren't the easiest to get a handle on. The Celtic, or Gallic people, stretched out from Central Europe towards Gaul, Iberia, and the British Isles, but also went southeast towards the Black Sea, and one problem for us loser historians is that it's unclear how, and even kinda if, they settled in Britain. There are competing theories for who, when, where.
So it seems like they were, maybe very nomadic while being able to take and put down some roots.
And why, ranging from the standard migration models to the possibility that very few Celts.
Okay. So with many periods in history that lack reliable documentation, the Bronze Age is an area of heavy and ongoing academic debate. Archaeology helps fill in many gaps, but there is still much about the Celts that we're merely guessing at, such as life. What's funny is like, just, lack of reliable documentation. There's idiots out there who believe that Rome and the Roman Empire and culture is, it's all made up by the papacy, by the Roman Catholic Church. So, even though there's tons of stuff that point to it, but because it pulls from Grecian and other cultures, like, this is something that, that's something that there's actual record of. This makes sense as far as not being able to take and definitively pin down stuff, because there's just not a whole lot
Actually settled in Britain. Logic being that overseas trade was key to the Bronze Age economy, and Britain's tin deposits made them a big export hub. Since tin is half the chemical structure for bronze, that meant people from all over Europe and the Mediterranean came to the Atlantic coasts to get their bronze on, and this includes our Celt boys. So it wasn't mass migration that brought Celtic people to Britain, but rather local Britons who buddied up with Celtic traders by speaking their language and copying their swirly Latin art. So according to this meme model, the local Britons thought Celtic culture was LOL so relatable XD that they adopted it all up and down the Isles. Whether or not this model is fully accurate, it would account for some weird archaeological and linguistic discrepancies in the traditional migration theory, and it also foreshadows the prestige placed on bards and literary prowess by
one notable quirk with a standard migration model is the divergence between the Brittonic and Irish branches of the Gaelic language family. Irish Gaelic appears to be older than Brittonic, which wouldn't make sense if Celts migrated through Britain first. Some double migration models try to reconcile this apparent contradiction. So there's a lot. Okay, so apparently the debate's pretty in depth, and without with that kind of conflicting stuff, I could see the reason why.
By later Celtic cultures, because it's equal parts cool as all hell and existentially horrifying that a culture can, basically by itself, take hold of an entire population by willing itself into existence. This would be our first indication that Wales has big eldritch energy. Other civilizations, however, would not follow this lead because the Romans found that culture was best delivered by spearpoint. While on their way to fill out their pan-imperial punch card and get their 10th new province free, Roman emperors in the mid-1st century campaigned into Britain. Most Roman settlements were in the south and east, where all the easy agriculture was, and although goods, coins, and Roman legions did make their way west, the cultural and linguistic impact on so-called Britannia Secunda was only slight. Perhaps the most transformative thing the Romans did in Wales was leave, because the post-Roman migrations from Central Europe into Britain totally upended the island's demographics. Frustratingly, it's nigh impossible to show this kind of thing clearly on a map, which is why turbulent centuries in history with slim documentation make blue a sad boy, but here's the gist. We know the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes from northern Europe arrived and displaced many of the Romano-Britons, but over in the west there was also an influx of Irish Celts coming in to settle. This age of migrations was much more overtly migratory than the Celtic arrival in Britain in the millennium before, though, again, the native Britons didn't really leave. After a few decades of raiding gave way to much more peaceable settlement.
And see, this stuff right here and the way it's explained, it further for me at least, the language itself and the intermingling of so many different, for etymology purposes, the basis of words and stuff like that completely makes sense. I mean, just, they're so, golly, dude.
Most Britons were happy to start speaking Germanic and make friends with their new Saxon neighbors than to up and book it for the
Should go without saying, but early medieval Britain was a fabulously diverse place, home to people from all over the Roman Empire and Northern Europe. Angles and Saxons were one part of a larger picture, and the idea of some singular Anglo-Saxon identity is a complete fiction. That term is useless. So it's basically a melting pot, is what it was, a melting pot. An ancient melting pot.
Britons were happy to start speaking Germanic and make friends with their new Saxon neighbors than to up and book it for the hills. Still, the end result was the confinement of native Celtic culture to the far west in Wales and Cornwall. And that split explains why it's called Wales. It comes from the Germanic word wala, meaning foreigner, while the Welsh call it cymru, from the Celtic word for countryman. It's also in this migratory shuffle that the legend of the Romano-British...
It's funny how you can have, basically, I mean, it's on the same island, but they're foreigner. And the Welsh, countrymen, like it's pretty interesting.
From the Celtic word for countryman. It's also in this migratory shuffle that the legend of the Romano-British King Arthur first pops up, though it'll be a couple centuries before he's labeled as Arthur, or a king. Honestly, the whole early medieval period in Wales has this pseudo-mythic Age of Heroes vibe to it. Good documentation is blah, what else is new, but the oral traditions that will later become the core of Welsh epic literature get their start in this era. So, as far as we can tell, what was going on in medieval Wales? Well, isolation from Germanic majority England was good for preserving a unified Celtic culture, but the politics were much more
Dragons are a big deal in Wales. A red dragon, Dragoch, represents the Welsh Celtic people, while the white dragon represents the Saxon people. Okay.
Various local princes vied for hegemony over the many disparate realms, but succession always proved their undoing, as sons would squabble and big kingdoms would shrink back to where they started. The princes of Gwynedd and Powys were the most successful of the bunch, and as a result, King Offa of Mercia built a dike across his border in the late 700s to try and keep Powys out. But that worked about as well as any frontier walls have worked throughout history, which is to say...
The kaiju and enormous Category 4 broke through the coastal wall in less than an hour.
barely. So despite the best attempts of Saxon kings and the Irish Sea, Wales wasn't entirely cut off from the rest of the world, as they had gotten on board with Christianity thanks to the missionary Saint David back in the 6th century. They might not have been the most consistent of pen pals with the Pope in Rome, but they were mostly on the same page. Wales'
like
early medieval history of relative chill was aided by England's near-constant Viking tire fire, which pushed Conquer Wales way down the to-do list. But that changed when our old pals the Normans kite-shielded their way to conquering England, because suddenly this new Norman England had a much stronger army, and they proceeded to point it right at Wales. Norman lords pushed into Wales along the northern and southern coasts and made some, but not a lot of progress. Since Wales was made of small principalities, the Normans could play the Welsh off each other, but then all of their gains were only incremental. Not so easy as winning Hastings and calling it a day. While casual war was the standard for the next 200 years along the borderland marches, elements of Anglo-Norman and Welsh culture made their way across.
Bro, this is so much in just a 5-minute span, it's not even funny.
The princes of Gwynedd, Powys, and Deheubarth picked up some Norman political structures, and England learned about Welsh longbows the hard way. Although Wales didn't form into a unified nation, they did get close a couple times. Llewellyn Var fought off his family members to become Prince of Gwynedd and proceeded to bap all of his enemies out of the way so that he could assert his hegemony over Wales. He also tried to streamline the rules for royal succession so that every interregnum didn't immediately explode into a civil war. He then pushed eastward into the March and defeated King John of England so handily that his barons made him sign the Magna Carta to stop being such a royal knob. Llewellyn's military successes weren't quite matched by his grandson, also Llewellyn, though he did the biggest prince in Wales.
Llewellyn. There's two L. So the two L's make the Hugh sound with the Y. See, this is. I could see the reason why it'd be hard to break any code done in Welsh. Just throwing it out there.
Wales routine again, he was defeated by England's King Edward Longshanks. The next year, in 1283, Edward pushed into Wales and stomped out the princes, using the old Norman trick of building a buttload of castles in newly conquered territory to stop the locals from getting ideas. In a twist that should surprise no one, England needed more than a few of these to do the trick, so Wales has the highest castle density of any country in Europe, with over
That says something for such a small country, like, to have that that many castles to assert dominance and take it over. That says a lot about the amount of fight in the folks.
600 built and 100 still standing today. That is, and I really cannot stress this enough, a stupid amount of castles. That's the density equivalent of 23 castles in New York City, with a less impressive but still formidable 2 castles just in Manhattan. Good lord! In any case, the post-conquest period was a weird century for Wales. Suddenly they were subordinate to England, but soon they got tied up in the 100 Years' War, and then everybody had plague to contend with. So while it was a real wacky time, it was also surprisingly indicative of the history still to come, as England goes about its business while holding a pillow.
All the places England conquered. There's so much different text in here to take and even add context to everything that's being talked about in the video. It's insane, dude. Of all the places England conquered, Wales was the first most thorough. So thorough that is mentioned is very often overlooked. I like to describe later Welsh history as colonizational stealth mode.
Over Wales' face, gently shushing them and hoping nobody notices. Forgive me for speedrunning through the next several centuries, but I've already done the England plotline once, and that was painful enough. A century after a thwarted independence uprising in 1400, Wales had the good fortune to pull a reverso and put...
Yes, Welsh rose against England on other occasions, 1287, 94, 95, 13, 14, 16, 26, 45, 6. So they've been fighting they fought for independence for quite a few times.
Put a Welshman on the English throne. The man in question was one Henry VII, notable ender of the War of the Roses, and he set up Wales for greater integration with England and way more rights than they had before. This all became official via the Laws in Wales Acts passed by Henry VIII in the mid-1500s. He drew up county borders, standardized laws, gave Welshmen equal status as Englishmen, and gave Wales representation in Parliament. And as an added bonus of Henry's hop over to Protestantism, the Church translated the Bible into Welsh. This protection of the Welsh language coincided coincided with a new interest in medieval culture and ancient literature, and language became a defining feature of the Welsh identity. While all of this was going on, the political story of Wales got folded into the larger English narrative, what with the Spanish Armada-ing, the union of the crowns of England and Scotland-ing, and the creation of a globe-spanning empire. Despite playing second fiddle, maybe closer to fourth, in the history of the British Empire, Welsh literature was rising in prominence during the Romantic movement, thanks in part to some shiny new editions of classic works. Specifically, Lady Charlotte Guest compiled and published the 4 branches of the Mabinogi, and doubly translated too, so Welsh and English readers could both enjoy the medieval folklore. In contrast to Scots Gaelic going kaput and Irish Gaelic suffering a steep decline in the 1800s that they're only recently bouncing back from, Welsh literature and poetry came in clutch for the long-term endurance of the language. But while the Romantic era was in full swing, so too was the Industrial Revolution. So all these fancy new machines and choo-choo trains needed coal if they wanted to do anything, and Wales happens to have a crap ton of the stuff. Southern Wales swiftly became the mining capital of the empire, and while coal and slate may have been big business, they were also hellish jobs to work. So Wales ended the century more urbanized than it had ever been, but the Welsh probably weren't so thrilled about why, especially as British attitudes towards them soured and Wales got the dingy reputation shared by all other regions doing heavy industry. Although the 1900s started out pretty rough, what with the coal mining and a nasty spell of discrimination against the Welsh language in schools and work.
18th to early 1900s, students in Wales dreaded the Welsh not, a linguistic hot potato given to anybody caught speaking Welsh. At the end of the day, whomever was unlucky enough to hold it was subject to corporal punishment. Linguistic prejudice was fierce during the Victorian High Imperial era. That's sucks to hear, just, stuff like that happen. I mean, a cultural identity should not be used as, against people.
Wales turned a corner after the Second World War. Industry diversified, and politicians campaigned for more regional autonomy and
Welsh choirs, the Welsh boys group, holy shit, that's one of the prettiest, most beautiful things I've ever heard. Absolutely, just, you have to take and give me some more to react to. Time-honored treasure with roots in Protestant church choirs and hard experience in the coal mines, they're a beloved aspect of Welsh culture.
Protections for the language. The Welsh Language Acts of 1967 and 93 elevated Welsh to on par with English, granting bilingual signage, the right to use Welsh in legal proceedings, and Welsh language broadcasting. So now a third of Wales can speak the native language. And in 1999, Wales, and also Scotland, but that's a different story, got its own national assembly, later promoted to Parliament. And that's Wales. Far too often sidelined in the history of the Isles, Wales has an enchanting historical vibe the other 3 countries lack. Maybe it's the ancient Celtic language and the dragon flag getting to me, but Wales feels older, like you can wander slightly too far up a hiking trail and stumble into Narnia. As anybody who knows Welsh can confirm, it just sounds like the language dragons would speak, and I know better than to disrespect the dragon lords. Thank you so much for...
That was cool. I've taken a look even further into the history of Wales. Because it's, again, the flag itself is something that you would associate, like you would think that that'd be a flag that you'd see in like an illustrated fantasy book or something like that. It's such a badass flag. It really is. But that's a whole lot of history for one little country. And just I've got to dig deeper, man. I really do. That was really cool. I will be looking at Scotland here shortly as well. But for Wales, man, everybody I've talked to from Wales, or that takes and types out Welsh in my Discord, really nice people, man. And yeah, definitely have to take a closer look. This was really interesting. Definitely whets the appetite. That being said, y'all be good to each other. Love yourselves. Peace.